we should be starting, and this is my great pleasure to introduce a speaker that needs actually no introduction. As you see, the room is full packed, just because everybody knows why it is worth always to listen to what Dan has to say. It is also my great pleasure to welcome him in this building because this is his first trip to Poland, I hope not the last one. And today is the premiere of the Polish translation of his latest book, of this perfect writer, From Bacteria to Back and Back, which you can see is a very thick book which summarizes its main important themes, which might be one reason why you're here. The reason is that the main thought here is that philosophy makes difference. It makes difference because it does not involve in mere technicalities. It tries to paint the broadest possible rational picture of the world. And for this reason, we need to connect the manifest image and the scientific image somehow. What we know from science and what we know from common sense. And this is the life task of the philosophy of Daniel Dennett, who has written a number of books, a number of which are available also in Polish. So this meeting is organized as part of the conference Transcendent Interdisciplinary Series, which takes part in Lublin this year, and is sponsored by the Graduate School for Social Research that has its 25th anniversary this year, and it has been publicized by the Politica Weekly that is also sensitive to issues of science and philosophy, as you see. So it is my great pleasure to hand over to Professor Dennett. Thank you.
If I just stand, can you hear me okay? Yes. In the back? Okay? Yes. All right, because I will probably have to sit down at some point. It's been a long day. I just flew overnight, so I'm a bit jet lagged. But it's an honor to be here in this wonderful country, in this wonderful city. Do you want me to do something different with the mic?
You need to use
move it
the
over?
mic, otherwise the right foot won't work, so we need to adjust this.
Okay. How's that? Better?
The biggest philosopher in the world.
Good. And then if I sit down, I'll put it down. Yeah. Yeah. I got a brief chance to visit the Poland Museum today and want to come back. We're not going to be in Warsaw just today, so we're going to have to make another trip sometime because that's an amazing place. So I'm delighted to be here, and thank you all for coming. So now let's see if everything works. Yes. So this is the American edition of my book, From Bacteria to Bach and Back. And most of what I'll be saying tonight is in the book, along with a lot more support than I can give it here. But I'm going to give you an overview with a few extra bits thrown in on the side. So even if you've read the book, there'll be something for you to hear that you haven't heard or read before. This is a favorite slide of mine. Can everybody see it? On the left, we have a termite castle, Australian termite castle. And on the right, we have, of course, Antoni Gaudi's famous La Sagrada Familia, the church in Barcelona. They look eerily alike, and the similarities are not just superficial. If you look even at the interiors and at the structures and at the sort of architecture, they're very similar artifacts. And consider this, they're both artifacts made by animals. Now, however similar they look, I want to claim the way in which they were designed and built, profoundly different. There's two entirely different phenomena here, even though the results are strikingly comparable. The one on the left is built by termites, millions of termites, and they're basically clueless. They don't understand what they're doing. There's no boss, there's no blueprint, there's no policy. They just do their myopic little thing, and this amazing structure unfolds. We might call that bottom-up research and development. Gaudí is the exact opposite. Charismatic, dictatorial boss, lording it over his subordinates who lord it over their subordinates, who lord it over their subordinates, who lord it over the people who actually put the bricks in place and cut the stone and all the rest. So that's top down. So and of course he had manifestos and blueprints. It was all planned out in advance. He made a lot of changes along the way. So here we have two very different processes. Gaudí's top-down intelligent design, the termites' bottom-up non-intelligent design. You might call it Darwinian design. Now, the reason I raise this is that a termite colony might have millions of basically clueless termites, all doing their little thing. Each of you has, inside your skull, about 86 billion, by latest count, even more clueless neurons. Let's see, I'm going to show you. Here's a couple of wonderful micro videos of termites in action. They're just in a petri dish, but the termites in your brain are sending out little processes and doing their little thing. They don't know anything about Warsaw or philosophy or anything. And yet, if you put together 86 billion of them, you can get a human mind like yours. Because I know there's some controversy in some quarters about this, but I think the plain fact is what your mind is your brain, and your brain is composed of 86 billion neurons and a lot of glial cells and astrocytes, but that's all. No magic ingredients. And there's no neuron that knows who you are or cares. There's no neuron that recognizes the Poland Museum. They are all fundamentally uninformed about the world you know so much about, and yet it's their activity that makes you the conscious being you are. How is this possible? How do you get a Gaudí-type mind out of a termite colony brain? This is the problem of cognitive science. How do you get the kind of mind that we have, reasoning, imagining, inventing, discovering, planning, dreaming, out of billions of neurons? And the short answer is you infect the brain with culture, with thinking tools. In other words, add words and stir. Now I've got to explain how that could be the case. But first I want to just check you out on a question. How many of you agree with this sentence? Words don't exist. Raise your hands if you don't think that words exist. We have some real philosophers. To look at a at the 3 words on the screen and say, right, words don't exist, takes a certain amount of sophistication. Most of us think that words exist. I think that words exist. But what are they? What are they made of? What kind of a thing is a word? Let's build up to it a little bit. Dogs are a kind of what? Mammal or pet. Yeah. Words are a kind of what? Well, you might a sound. No, that's not really right. A sign, yeah, sort of. A symbol. Yeah. I'm going to tell you, words are a kind of meme. And they're a particular kind of meme. They're the kind of memes that can be pronounced. Lots of memes can't be pronounced, but words can. That's genus and species, if you like. Memes is a larger category, words is a subcategory, and they are, in fact, the best subvariety of memes. Now, the term memes, of course, comes from Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, of 1976. And what memes are items of culture that spread by being reproduced, sometimes with changes or mutations. They form lineages, and there's differential replication and extinction. Sounds just like evolution. That's because it is evolution. It's natural selection of memes. Memes evolve just like animals and plants and viruses by natural selection. Well, now, what is a meme? Just to see how the culture was evolving, I decided to check this out in the Collins online dictionary. And this is what the Collins online dictionary says. A meme is, it's something such as a video, picture, or phrase that a lot of people send to each other on the internet. Then it goes on, not as helpfully as they think, saying, short for my meme, both coined by Richard Dawkins, British biologist? Yes. Yeah. Well, is this what Dawkins meant when he coined the term in 1976, internet memes? No. I want to compare his idea of the meme to the idea of the Big Bang, Fred Hoyle's 1949 coinage about the origin of the universe. Now, if you check in the United States, if you Google the Big Bang, the first few pages of Google are about the television comedy, not about Fred Hoyle. Do you get that over here? Some of you know about the Big Bang Theory? Yeah. Okay. But Big Bang still means what Hoyle meant. It hasn't morphed in its semantics, really. Here's Dawkins' version of what a meme is. This is going back to the original 1976. I think that a new kind of replicator has recently emerged on this very planet. It is staring us in the face. It is still in its infancy, still drifting clumsily in its primeval soup, but already it's achieving evolutionary change at a rate which leaves the old gene panting far behind. The new soup is the soup of human culture. Now, what do internet memes have to do with evolution by natural selection? Has Dawkins' term just been hijacked? Has his meaning of meme gone extinct? Many, especially in the humanities, would hope so. They would gleefully say this is a fittingly unrespectable demise of an abhorrent idea. Well, this has puzzled me and fascinated me for a long time. Why do so many people in the arts and humanities hate the idea, Dawkins' idea of a meme, so much? What's not to like? Consider, in an otherwise glowing review of my book, Shane O'Mara says, Dennett's Maginot Line defense of memes can be safely ignored as an unnecessary diversion. The meme is an entirely fruitless concept. And Stephen Rose calls memes vacuous and theoretically useless. So what's not to like? To see why so many are opposed to it, we must look at the key features of Dawkins' concept of a meme. Memes are replicators like genes. Culture evolves, according to this view, by a process of blind, purposeless, foresightless natural selection. Not by intelligent design. That's what people don't like. Dawkins says that differential reproduction is the key, not human genius. Now we want to think about that. Let's look at internet memes. They have authors. They are intelligently designed, more or less, by meme smiths. There are even competitions to design the most viral memes. This seems to be almost a contradiction to Dawkins' idea of a meme. Are these not such profound differences from Dawkins' memes that they must count as a different type or species altogether? No? No. Well, why not? Question, are dinosaurs extinct? No. There's probably a few of their descendants in the trees right outside the window. Birds are direct descendants of dinosaurs. They're not very much like dinosaurs, but there is a lineage that takes them back to dinosaurs. So in that sense, they're not extinct. They've just changed tremendously by a gradual process. A gradual process. Change we can believe in. Some of you may recognize this is a parody on the famous Obama poster. Now, the question is culture different? Did culture evolve by Darwinian processes? Or did it arrive in some sort of Big Bang? I am going to defend yet another gradualism. What I'm claiming in the book is cultural evolution happened gradually. The first memes were adopted unwittingly, roughly the same way you catch a cold. You don't even know what's happening. You don't have to know. You're not paying attention, but you change. The meme has found a home in your brain. Reflectiveness about memes came much later. So what I want to talk about is the de-Darwinization of cultural evolution. If we look around today, we find lots of intelligent meme smiths, a lot of intelligent designers, writing songs, building skyscrapers, discovering new planets, composing and defending theories, and all the rest of that intelligent design. And that doesn't look like Dawkins means much at all. But I want to claim that's just, if you think of culture as composed of items like that, you're adopting a sort of temporal myopia. You're looking at recent culture, by which I mean the culture of the last 10,000 years. Human culture is a lot older than that. And in the early days, it was much more meme-ish, much more as Dawkins describes than it is today. But even today, and I'm not going to go into this much in the talk, although there's a lot in the book, we overestimate the amount of intelligent design that goes into the wonderful things that we rely on every day. Even when we can identify a designer. How many of you have ever played a game of chess where you made a move which a few moves later turned out to have been brilliant? But when you made it, you didn't know why it was a good move. But when it turned out so well, you sort of took credit for it. You didn't say, oh, I was just, I don't know, making a guess. Well, if you've ever done anything like that, you're in very good company. Much of the brilliant, intelligent design that we see around us had its beginning as a sort of a, well, let's try this. And when it works, you get declared a genius. And when it doesn't, everybody forgets. So what are memes? Dawkins says, tunes, ideas, catchphrases, clothes fashions, ways of making pots or of building arches. Quoting from the book. I want to concentrate on one word there, ways. That's what memes are, they're ways. They're ways of doing something, ways of acting, ways of talking, ways of dressing, ways of thinking, of making something, but not instincts. Instincts are ways too, but they're a different kind of ways, and the difference is very simple. Memes are transmitted perceptually, whereas instincts are transmitted genetically. The way an oriole builds its nest is transmitted through the germline, through the genes. When it builds its first nest, it's never seen an oriole nest being built, and yet it knows how to build a species-typical nest. When a contractor builds a house, the contractor has a lot of perceptual experience that goes into knowing how to do that. There's no instincts for house building, as far as we know. Memes are items of culture that spread by being copied, by being reproduced, sometimes with changes or mutations. And as I said before, they form lineages. So what we have is a phenomenon of differential replication and extinction. Memes evolve, just like animals and plants, and as I said before, viruses, by natural selection. Now, memes, like viruses, are not alive. Being alive is not a necessary condition for natural selection to operate. Like viruses, they're subject to natural selection. What are viruses if they're not living things? Some people said they are, but they have no metabolism, for instance. What they are nucleic acid with attitude. And by attitude, I mean just there's something about their shape, which is pretty much all they've got, which gives them the power, the proclivity, the talent to provoke a cell which has a copy machine in it to copy it rather than its own DNA. That's how viruses reproduce. They don't have their own copy machinery in hand, but they have just an inbuilt talent to get themselves copied and to do this more often than the competition. So they evolve. Is there any doubt that they evolved? Not at all. The HIV virus has evolved more since it was first sequenced than the human genome has evolved since we parted company with our common ancestor, with the chimpanzee. So you don't have to be alive to be an absolutely classic case of something that evolves by natural selection. So what are memes? If viruses are nucleic acid with attitude, memes are virtual machines, software with attitude. More on this in just a moment. And they compete for transmission and also for local influence. Where? In human culture and its media and in brains. The sort of key medium of human culture. What are memes made of? Now I'm going to sit, because I'm getting a little... Let's see if I can do this on my own. Okay? Want to adjust it a little bit more? Yeah. Yeah.
Evolves.
It,
Okay.
it revolves, not evil. Well, memes, just like genes, are actually informational entities. Now, this is the point of some contention in evolutionary theory, but the late, great George Williams and John Maynard Smith, two of my heroes, Richard Dawkins, David Hagen, a whole host of other evolutionary theorists, say the gene is the information, not the DNA. Poems aren't made of ink, and genes aren't made of DNA. DNA is simply the physical vehicle for getting the information from one place to another. So they're like poems, or like algorithms, or habits, or words. Words are the best memes. That is to say, they're the best examples of memes. Why? Because, well, for one thing, they're countable. Pretty easy to say when you've got one word and when you've got two. They have clear lineages. You can trace words in French and Italian and Spanish back to Latin, and from there back you can go all the way back to Indo-European, and the same is true of English words and Polish words. They have lineages. They mutate in meaning and in pronunciation and in grammatical role. And words compete for space and brains the way bacteria and viruses compete for space and bodies. Words go extinct. With English-speaking audiences, I often take a word which is on the verge of extinction and say, who knows what a snaff is? Does anybody in this room know what a snaff is? Yes, what is it? Yes? Hmm? No. Maybe it is. A snaff is the handle of a scythe. That curved wooden handle that you use when you use a scythe, old-fashioned scythe, to cut hay or to cut grain. Officially, that's a snap and scythe, but most people just call it a scythe. Words go extinct. I've been through this. Memes, informational things, depend on living brains to reproduce. Now, this is not dualism. Memes are not material things, they're informational things. But it's no more dualism than the software-hardware distinction is dualism. Now, it's interesting, philosophers some of them are very sophisticated, and a very well-known philosopher, I will not say who, has argued with me relentlessly in the last several years, insisting that software does not exist. And I said, what, should we put Bill Gates in jail then for selling something that doesn't exist? Of course software exists. What's it made of? Don't ask. We understand. It's made of the same sorts of things that poems and algorithms are made of, or methods. Norbert Wiener, the man who coined the term cybernetics, and by the way, the most illustrious alumnus of my university, Tufts, where he studied mathematics and graduated at the age of 14. Information is information, not matter or energy. No materialism that does not admit this can survive at the present day. And he said that 70 years ago. So what I'm suggesting is, do not look askance at memes because you can't weigh them or they have no chemical formula. Neither does software. Neither do poems. Perfectly good things. They're just informational things. They depend on physical implementations, physical vehicles to preserve themselves. That's true. But they are neutral with regard to what those vehicles actually are. Now, somebody else who had an insight into this was none other than Darwin himself. The survival or preservation of certain favored words in the struggle for existence is natural selection, he said way back in 1871. So the idea is not new with Dawkins. He came up with the term meaning. But of course, Darwin is talking here just about words. He's not making the generalization that Dawkins favors. Now, words are brilliantly designed, but not by us. One of the best design features of words, of languages, phonemes, one of natural selection's most brilliant inventions. No human being invented the system of phonemes. And yet, as I want to show you now, without it you couldn't have language. It is a brilliant feature. Remember, if you're going to have differential replication, you have to know what counts as replication. And when you have phonemes, this changes the game in a remarkable way. What counts as replication is not physical resemblance, but, to use the jargon of philosophy, being tokens of the same type. I'm going to illustrate that. Tell me what you see. Look at that T there. Compare it with this T here, or this T here. Look at this C. Compare it with that C. Here's another one. And yet, they're all cases of cat. They're physically very different, but we have no trouble recognizing them as instances of the word cat. Now, those aren't phonemes, those are letters. That's spelling. But I want to prove to you that the same thing is true in spoken language, which, of course, is much older and is the basis for written language and is evolutionarily much more important, I think, than written language. But first, I want to do an example. Tell me what you see. What do you see? The cat. But if you look closely, you'll see that the H and the A are exactly the same shape. You automatically, involuntarily, subconsciously correct. You straighten out the H and you close up the A. What you're doing is correcting to the norm. And that is the essence of digitization. It is correction to the norm, it's digitization that explains the tremendous fidelity of, say, computers. It's the fact that zeros and ones are all alike, even when they aren't alike, that makes digital storage of information such a brilliant technology. It was discovered by natural selection before it was discovered by Shannon and computer scientists. The DNA 4-valued code, ACGT, is a lovely example of digitization. And so are phonemes of a language. So here we're going to do a little auditory test. Some of you may have heard this before. I want you just to repeat after me. Listen carefully. Mundify the epigastrium. Again. One more time. Does anybody know what it means? You don't have to. That's the key. When people talk about language, they often, and rightly, are in awe of the fact that you can use language to communicate with understanding between people. It makes understanding possible. That's true. But that couldn't be the case if it weren't also the case that language, because of its digitization, because of its phonemes, permits you to transmit faithfully messages that you don't understand. Now let me prove it. We're going to do another case. Are you ready? Listen carefully. And again, and again, you can't do it. There was just as much variation in acoustic energy and volume and all the rest in my second example as it was in the first. And yet it was just gibberish to you, because your brain was not equipped with a little automatic tool to correct to the norm. Mundify the epigastrium. Mundify the epigastrium. Same thing. Lots of different variations in physical properties, but you have a little machine in you, a little virtual machine in you, that corrects to the norm, and that permits accurate transmission and replication. It is the key to natural selection. You have to have quite high fidelity, not perfect. If you had perfect fidelity, you couldn't have evolution. You have to have high fidelity to get natural selection. And human culture does have high fidelity when it comes to words, and also to other meme systems, which I go into in the book. But I'm just going to concentrate on words here. Okay. As I say, this is the key to high fidelity transmission, and DNA is a lovely example of a, as it were, a four-phoneme or a four-letter alphabet which permits correction to the norm. So I'm leading up to the suggestion that what our minds are, what our human minds are software. Words are virtual machines. They're informational entities. They don't weigh anything. But when they get installed, they can do things, you can do things. There are ways that you install in your brain that you didn't have before, and they add to your powers. Who designed them? Evolution did. Evolution designed the words. Cultural evolution. Not genetic evolution. There's no genes for speaking English, or Chinese, or Polish. Cultural evolution is the designer of all the words that get lodged in our heads and differentially replicate and then give us power. And how are they installed? By repetition. When a baby first hears a word, it's just a sound. Or actually, it's a sound in some context, maybe not very well noticed even by the baby. The second hearing, it's a familiar sound. I've heard that sound before. And it's sometimes in a somewhat similar context. The third hearing, it's that sound again. And at this point, an auditory anchor has been lodged in the brain. Phonology comes first, meaning comes later. And pretty soon, the child is trying to repeat that sound in that context, and pretty soon you have a child that isn't just babbling, but is actually saying words. A sophisticated data structure gets tied to that auditory anchor. Now, children learn 2 to 3 words a day from birth to age 5. How many words have you learned today? I can think of one, snap. But they also learn lots of other memes that don't have auditory anchors. Remember, words are memes that can be pronounced. Now, how did cultural evolution ever get started? We're the only species with serious cumulative culture. People love to argue about this, and they talk of, yes, chimpanzees have termite fishing and nut cracking and a few seduction signals that seem to be culturally transmitted, but that's about it. And no other species has much of anything more. Well, I think there's consensus growing now that first you have the genetic information highway. That's your genes. That's the information that you get basically from your parents and that give you a lot of the powers that you have. But there's a second information highway, which is known as social learning. And it begins being just what you learn from your parents, which is a very great deal, as it turns out. And in fact, there are adaptations for social learning in us. Prolonged infancy just means that a human infant is going to be dependent and in the company of a parent or other caregiver for quite a long period of time. This gives you a lot of face time, a lot of time for cultural transmission to occur. And also you get something like imprinting on parents. Not so different from the way the ducklings that Lorenz studied imprinted on whatever moving thing they see after they hatch. You tend to have a differential focus, track one individual and hang around, and it's usually mother. I want you to compare this mother with this woman. They are both primates. There's a big difference that's visible in this picture. What's the one that makes the big difference?
No baby.
Well, no baby is true in that case. I should have cut the baby out more particularly. But I wanted the whites of the eyes. You notice that chimpanzees, you can't see the whites of their eyes. It has been argued, and the evidence is mounting, that having white sclera is an adaptation, a genetic adaptation, permitting more easy gaze monitoring so you can see where somebody's looking. It's very important for baby to be able to see where mama's looking, and having white sclera makes it that much easier to share gaze. Both orangutans and chimps lack sclera. So gaze monitoring is the basis for shared attention. And shared attention is a necessary condition for teaching and for much learning. So we get a second information highway from parents to offspring, which is itself genetically established and with genetic adaptations, as I've just said. Once it's in place, it can be invaded. And this is where you get what Boyd and Richardson call oblique transmission. Instead of just learning from mom and dad, you learn from your classmates and the guy down the street and people you see on television, people who are not your kin and who are not your parents. They call these rogue cultural variants. And it's very important that these items are nowhere near as likely to be beneficial to the infant as the information that you get from mother and father. And there's an obvious evolutionary reason for that. Now, I mentioned that Boyd and Richardson don't call these memes. They call them rogue cultural variants. Why? the reasons are complicated. Some of it's historical, some of it's sociological. I think in the case of Boyd and Richardson, if you know their work, they were onto a lot of this before Dawkins wrote The Selfish Gene, and they don't want to give him credit for coining the term for the thing that they were already thinking about. That might be part of it. Other theorists need memes even if they don't call them memes. They call them traditions or methods or ideas or non-genetically transmitted adaptations. They're memes, just memes under other names. Memes take advantage of the information highways built by evolution for many species, and these are particularly enhanced in Homo sapiens. So now let's put this in a bigger picture. Here's a lovely diagram of the great tree of life. This is the present around here. Here's the origin of life. So time goes this way. Everything that's alive today is represented out here at the periphery. Here's the archaea and the bacteria. Here's the eukaryotic revolution leading to this great spread. You see various extinctions happen. And if we look really closely over here in the mammal area, we can see a little twig. Let's get up even closer. That little Y twig right there, that's about 6 million years. So that could be the hominids on one branch and the chimpanzees on another. So you look back and you realize we're a very, 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 very recent species. Been around for hardly any time at all. Evolution may be slow and costly, but it is brilliant. Francis Crick used to joke about Orgel's second rule, evolution is cleverer than you are. He certainly didn't mean intelligent design. He meant that evolution, in its slow, plodding, mindless, purposeless way, comes up with fantastic design. Design that is often better than human designers, intelligent designers, can match. There's lots of wonderful anecdotes about scientists who thought some feature was one of nature's mistakes, only to figure out a little later, no, this is brilliant. This is better than anything we had thought of designing to do the same work. Well, Darwinian R&D, bottom-up termite-style R&D, has been around for 3.5 billion years. Today, intelligent design exists. This room is full of intelligent designers. And it's becoming ever more intelligent. This has some surprising implications. Here is a sentence that sums up what I find surprising and worth thinking about. How can a process with no intelligent designer create intelligent designers who can then design things that permit us to understand how a process with no intelligent designer can create intelligent designers who can then design things? Many people say, aha, there has to be a God, because that sentence is self-contradictory. No, it is not. But it is puzzling. And that's why the task of my book is to answer that question. How can a process with no intelligent designer create intelligent designers who can then design things that permit us to understand how a process with no intelligent designer can create intelligent designers who can then design things? Well, there's a question. Here's the wrong answer from Freeman Dyson. Technology is a gift of God. After the gift of life, it is perhaps the greatest of God's gifts. It is the mother of civilizations, of arts, and of the sciences. I think that is fine, except for the first sentence. I think that technology is the mother of civilizations, of arts and of sciences. But it isn't a gift of God. It evolved slowly, the old-fashioned Darwinian way. And the short answer is you can't do much carpentry with your bare hands, and you can't do much thinking with your bare brain. A termite colony is a bare brain. Intelligent designers have well-equipped brains, brains packed with virtual machines, thinking tools that give them new powers. Where do they get their tools? From cultural evolution. Designed thinking tools that impose novel structures on our brains, evolved virtual machines. They are apps that we download to our necktops. I mean that really quite literally. That's what you get an education for. You're downloading apps to your necktops. And it gives you powers you didn't have before, in the same way that, you know, a computer with just an operating system and no other software is not good for very much. It's the software where all the power is in the software. That's true of computers, it's true of smartphones, and it's true of your brains. You've got a primate brain, a mammalian brain, which happens to be very susceptible to taking on thinking tools designed elsewhere. You didn't have to design long division for yourself, or cost-benefit analysis, or alphabetizing, or language. You just were gifted those. And those are the source of our power and versatility. I've gone on quite long. I'm going to speed up a little bit now. In my book there are many objections to memes, and I give a whole chapter to objections to memes. I just want to let you know, I'm well aware of the objections to memes. The culture does not consist of discrete units. Unlike genes, no competition of alleles at loci. Memes add nothing to existing explanations of cultural phenomena. Memetics is not predictive. Cultural evolution is Lamarckian. I dismantle all of these objections and show why they are either irrelevant or just plain wrong. This is part of my relentless Maginot Line defense of memes, that fruitless and useless concept. What Darwin and Turing showed us is that there can be competence without comprehension. Mind, consciousness, and understanding is the effect, not the cause. Termites are not intelligent designers. Beavers are not very intelligent designers. We are the first intelligent designers in the tree of life. And we've only been around in this formulation for 50,000 years. Just an instant in evolutionary history. So the problem that culture solves is this. How do we get intelligent design with representation of reasons and so forth out of 86 billion mindless neurons? And the answer is it's the second great endosymbiotic revolution. Human culture consists of symbionts that compete to enter our brains, where they carve out space, make our brains better living places for further symbionts, and we're off to the races. In other words, we're apes with infected brains. That's the source of our power. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Dennett, ladies and gentlemen,
My name is Pavel Goracek. I have the pleasure of hosting this Q&A session. Let me just kick it off with one question of my own, a very quick one that refers to the title of the book. In the title you show basically that our evolution has a certain twist in it. We started with these processes that are blind, very competent but blind, and then these processes produced intelligent creators, and then intelligent creators started to produce more and more sophisticated things, but at the end, the corollary of these sophisticated things is something that resembles these blind processes again. That is deep learning machines, Google Translate, and stuff like this. So the question is, what's next? In the sense that let's just make a little speculation, because there are two possibilities. One possibility, one possibility is that these new stupid machines, so to speak, or blind, competent processes, will invent understanding of their own, and this is something some people are very afraid of, the Skynet scenario. Or maybe the other possibility is that we are just like this very weird bump in evolution, and it will never happen again. We're just this super obsolete biological technology.
And then there's other possibilities too. You're absolutely right. That you've just given a very nice expression of the point of the and back in my title. You get from bacteria to Bach, who is my paradigm of intelligent designer, along with Gaudi and Einstein and lots of other wonderful, smart people, men and women. But then, now, we're developing new technology, as you say, neural nets and deep learning systems, which are eerily Darwinian in the way they operate. They are more like termite colonies than like colleagues. And as you say, many are worried that as it were, they will necessarily develop, just inevitably will develop real comprehension of their own, and will then, I don't know, enslave us or replace us in every important position and so forth. I think that is not something to worry about, or at least there's something much more important to worry about that will happen much quicker and is already happening. And that is not that not that these systems will develop consciousness and will hit the singularity and they will replace us as the dominant cognitive species on the planet, but that people will think that the systems that we have understand much more than they actually do, and will come to rely on them and delegate to them the responsibility for making decisions which they're really not equipped to make and that we really don't want to delegate. This is a very delicate issue. I could go on and on, but I think maybe I will let some other questions come out.
Many more questions, but there was an audience that waits to ask questions. So two rules that will speed up things and make it smooth. One thing that we have to ask questions in English. We don't have a translator, and Google Translator isn't there yet. So the other thing is that we are asking one question, right? And no, it cannot be a conjunction of many questions. Right? Yep. Maybe you can start without mic and we'll see if it's okay.
Okay, so thank you for a very enlightening experience and lecture, but I was wondering if you could elaborate on one of the points from your presentation. You said that among those arguments that are sort of opposed to the concept of memes was the fact that they don't contribute that much to the field of study of cultural patterns and things.
They don't explain anything that we don't already know how to explain with other methods.
Yes. So, what in your mind, what is your rationale behind thinking that we do contribute, other than just being non-relational for the process of information sharing?
Thank you. I'm really glad you asked that question. I'll try to keep the answer short. First, it would be strange and dubious if a good scientific perspective could not avail itself of the previous good work that had been done from other perspectives and incorporate it without adding all that much to it, but simply put it all into a single frame. And I think that memetics can take over, well, really all the good work in the social sciences, for instance, and simply show how it fits into the memetic framework. And you might say, yeah, well, but where's the value added? I'll tell you now where the value is added. In one case only. Think of Durkheimian functionalism. The functionalists in the social sciences noticed that there were many wonderfully designed, or apparently wonderfully designed, policies, rituals, practices, institutions, methods in cultures that just cried out for a teleological functional explanation. But they didn't seem to be the work of any particular designer. They were not the works of brilliant lawgivers or institution designers. And so there was no mechanism to explain Durkheimian functions. And so it got a bad name, in a way, deservedly, because it looked like magic or romanticism. Memes can come along and say, we can explain how by differential replication, excellently designed cultural phenomena can come to exist. We don't need group genius, we don't need special entelechies or the idea of God, we don't need any of that. All we need is essentially clueless cultural evolution. A wonderful book on this, by the way, some of you may have read it, is Joe Henrich's recent book, The Secret of Our Success, which is a fine companion, in a way, or extension of my view, and I guess in some ways an anticipation of it. And he gives lots of examples of excellently designed human practices where the human beings who are the beneficiaries and the transmitters of these have no clear idea of why they're good or how they're good. They're just doing what we've always done, and it works. And so I think once this new perspective is more widely adopted, people will see the examples that Henrich and Boyd, Rob Boyd in his new book, what's it called, A Different Kind of Animal, and Starelny in his book, The Evolved Apprentice, we're going to see an explosion of cases where otherwise puzzling social phenomena come under the rubric of memetics, and which can explain the phenomena and even make predictions.
Any more questions? Yes.
Thank you for recognition. I want to ask a question. Because with the current speed of memetic replication on the internet and elsewhere, the fact of some certain statements being false and overriding the statements that are true creates a kind of white noise of meaning and sense in which truth is dragged. Do you think that we are currently, due to the fact of this immense memetic replication, on a path to cultural degeneration that starts with the fact of free evolution of means that can pose a threat to truth?
Yes. I've been worried about this. Talking about it earlier today with some people at Politica. Yes, I think we've entered. There's a piece that Deb Roy and I did in Scientific American on what we call the new transparency, which says that every human institution is now vulnerable in a new way because of the electronic transparency, the fact that it's much harder to keep secrets. Secrets are good. You can't be an effective agent if you can't keep your own counsel and keep your plans from the other agents in the world. And that's true whether you're an individual or a government or an army or a university. And this new transparency is creating very dangerous, destructive, it's really doing some serious harm and threatening worse harm to informed consent and democracy, to the rule of law, to respect for sources that are respectable. One of my most worrisome examples is it doesn't matter how much integrity and how much money you put into becoming a solid, fact-checking, factual source of news. Suppose you succeed and you've become the source of record. Very expensive, very difficult. A well-aimed rumor can destroy your credibility, and there's almost nothing you can do about it. I think we're entering a period where the advantage of offense over defense, of reputation and of credibility, is become a very serious problem. So yes, I think we're in for a rough ride.
After the Journal of Memetics closed, are you aware of any peer-reviewed publications on memetics?
Any
Peer-reviewed journals?
Are there any journals on memetics, peer-reviewed journals on memetics right now? After
No, there was a journal of memetics which was electronically published for a few years, and it folded, as it should have, for want of enough serious substantive work. I think we are at the very beginning of serious work. There are books and articles by the dozens that don't call themselves memetics, but they're doing memetics. And maybe that's clever. Maybe you don't want to, since so many people hate the idea of memetics for bad reasons, maybe if you've got a really good theory of cultural evolution, my advice to you might be careful about whether or not you want to call it memetics, because you're going to incur the wrath and the disbelief of a lot of people, no matter how good your theory is. But no, right now, there's lots of publications that I would call serious work in memetics. There's a chapter by me called The New Replicators in the Oxford University Press Handbook of Evolution. And in that I list, and that's 10 years old, that piece, but in it I list work that was current then, which I still would recommend as, peer-reviewed work to take seriously.
So there's some irony in that, don't you think that it seems that the word man is not a very good man itself? It doesn't replicate as we would want to.
Well, after all, one of the points that both Dawkins and I have always made about memes is that if we really take meme fitness seriously, then a meme may be absolutely harmful to us or useless, but still be very fit in its own terms. Just like HIV or the Zika virus. And there is also, one might say, look, the meme has succeeded, beyond Richard Dawkins' wildest dreams or nightmares. It's now on everybody's lips. Everybody knows the word. I'll tell you a little anecdote. I've been talking with Richard Dawkins for years and defending memes ever since I first read The Selfish Gene. And at one point, he said to me, Dan, when you talk about memes now, don't mention my name. And the reason was the Oxford English Dictionary, the canonical, the 1,000-page work of the English language, has a rule that they don't count occurrences of newly coined words that cite the coiner. And he wanted to get the word into the OED, so he said, use it, but don't mention my name, because then it won't count. Well, he got his wish and then some. But unfortunately, only a small minority of the people who know the word meme know Dawkins' meaning of it.
Okay, so my question is, how can you really tell that people are intelligent designers? And what I mean by that is, if we are just equals or memes, why don't we say that every great thing that is created in the world is really work of memes and not our work? How are we different from the cell that is just a replicator for the virus?
Well, that's a good question, but I think the answer in a way is obvious. What each of us is not just the biological animal, but the biological animal as currently inhabited by all the memes that matter to that individual. And they're all part of what make you you, and some of them you may not particularly care for, but you got them, and others you might even be willing to die for. We're the only species that dies for an idea, or kills for an idea. Well, let's take Chopin, to pick an example not quite at random. A staggering genius of invention, a wonderful, intelligent designer. But of course, part of the price that he paid for being such a brilliant designer was having his head filled with systems of means which prevented him from writing other music. He had to write Chopin music. I mean, he couldn't just do, Mozart or Schubert or anybody else. And having a style is actually a constraint. And knowing a lot about the history of art for an artist is a constraint. But without those constraints, you'll never do anything that's worth doing. So indeed, an intelligent designer, it's not the underlying hardware that's the intelligent designer. It's the underlying hardware equipped with all the thinking tools that person has acquired in the course of a lifetime of study and practice and research and tinkering. And indeed, there's some hardware is better than others. Some, music runs in some families, and mathematical genius in others. But I don't think there's any. I think that if you say, well, look, I am not really responsible. It's just this darn collection of memes that I've got in my head that is responsible. that darn collection of memes, that's you. That's who you are.
There's a nice quote from Philip Glass that fits this story. He said that when he was young, he was really wanted to find his own style. That was, he dreamed about it. He was really struggling with it. But then he found his style, and his bigger problem started to be that he wanted to lose his style, because he started to be like a slave of his style. So that's, I guess that's pretty fitting to this description. And yeah? I think that I will have to go there.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
So you said that both culture and technology evolved by natural selection. Yeah? What is your view of the relationship between the two, and what is your work's relationship perhaps with other people like Urbanization or Racjonalista?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last sentence.
So you said that they evolved both by natural selection. What is your view on the relationship between technology and memes?
Yeah.
And culture? And what is perhaps your worst relationship to that of people like Bernard Stiegler or Urbanization in cybernetics?
Well, first of all, technology is memes. To give a simple, old-fashioned example, as I once said, a wagon with spoked wheels doesn't just carry grain from town or from farm to town. It carries the idea of a wagon with spoked wheels. And that's transmission of a meme. So boats and planes and cell phones and buildings are themselves meme products, and we perceive them and think about them in terms of the memes that we transmit. So it's not that there's memes and then there's technology. Technology is in effect composed of memes. And of course a lot of technology is, as it were, composed of just informational entities. Poetry's technology. There's a lovely quote by the critic Winsat, not the evolutionary biology philosopher Winsat, about the test of a poem is whether it works, and you have to sort of reverse engineer the poem to see how it works and why. But the test is ultimately, does it work as he's comparing it to a machine. I think that's wise. Well, that's one question. I don't think, if there was another, I won't answer it because that's too.
Yeah, okay, so,
Does all the culture can be reduced to memes, or are there some other entities necessary to explain it?
Yeah. Not all culture is composed of sort of particular countable entities. A nice example is trust, which is more like the atmosphere than like an organism. The atmosphere is itself a product of biological activity. It's not just given by chemistry, it is the current state of the result of all that life history on the planet. And something like trust is, of course, a very important part of culture. And there is, as it were, a meme. There's the word trust. That's a meme. But trust is not a meme. It's a replicating relatively stable but possibly unstable background condition for culture. And there are many others.
You're told that phonetics is not predictive, am I right?
Excuse me?
You're told that phonetics is not predictive, am I right?
No, that's one of the standard objections.
Okay, so you suppose that in future or right now you could make some predictions or interesting insights on the basis of these further studies.
I want to point out first that there's a sense in which evolutionary biology isn't predictive either. Which species are going to go extinct when, or what are they going to morph into? The reason for that is very simple, and I think interesting. Natural selection as a process is a stupendous noise amplifier. It takes things which almost never happen and happen for no reason, and it opportunistically takes some of them and amplifies them, and those are unpredictable. Practically unpredictable in every case. So evolutionary biology can't predict the future that way, but it can predict the future the way that matters for science. I'll give you an example. It can say things like this. If you find I'll just make this up. If you find a new species of burrowing, tunnel-making rodent on some, in Borneo that's never been seen before, I can tell you a whole lot about its genome. I can tell you about its enzymes. I can tell you about variations of its genes. Those are predictions we can make sight unseen, and they are, of course, utterly well confirmed. There's no doubt about them at all. You can predict, in science, you can predict things about, for instance, if you dig here and find fossils, they will have the following properties. That's prediction. But it's really prediction about the past, not about the future. And memetics can be predictive about the past in the same way. Well, there are a lot of good examples in Joe Henrich's book, The Secret of Our Success, for one. But
Hi,
yeah.
it's Maria. Just before the question, I want to thank you for what you gave us today, which I find both truly interesting and interestingly true. Now the question. Do you care about passing your own names on to the world? If so, why? And what's your strategy?
I say it again because I missed something.
Sorry, the question again. Yes. Do you care about passing your own names on to the world? If so, why? And what will be your strategy? Am I clear here?
I'm still not sure what you want to know why I am intent on passing my means on?
Do you care?
Yes.
Are you keen on passing your own names to the world?
Yes, because I'm no less susceptible to selfishness and pride than any other semi-normal human being.
As do I, in the strategy.
I have a lot to say about that. You got to remember, I'm an academic philosopher, and many academic philosophers think it a point of honor to write books and articles which could not conceivably be understood by more than 10 people. That's what they want to do, and they do it. And they look down on people like me and think I'm just a popularizer or something like that. But I'm spreading those memes around, and they aren't. But I do it because I think philosophy has a real role to play in the world if you do it my way, or related way, and that is I think philosophy is what you're doing when you don't know yet whether you're asking the right questions. Once you know that you're asking the right questions, then you go and answer them, and that's science or history or it's some other ism, or ology. It's not philosophy. But in essentially every area of human inquiry, there is a sort of foggy, baffling cutting edge where people are not quite sure what the right questions are. And that's where I think philosophers can really help if they, first of all, learn the field in question, really get into the problems and learn to see the world the way the people in that field do, and then use their philosophical experience and training, such as it is, to basically to try to explain what the issues are in terms that everybody can understand. And it's hard, but it's worth trying.
What entities or what kind of entities do you have in your knowledge?
Oh, yes. I love to quote, one of my heroes in the philosophical world is Wilfrid Sellars. And Sellars famously said that the task of philosophy is to explain how things, in the broadest sense of the term, hang together in the broadest sense of the term. Now you might think, isn't that an acknowledgement of triviality or something? How things hang together? But if you think about all the different candidates for thinghood, for being in the ontology, look at what you've got. On the one hand, for Sellars, it was the manifest image and the scientific image. In the scientific image, you have electrons and quarks and atoms and molecules and cells and gravity and so forth. On the manifest side, you have such things as opportunities, zloty, home runs, haircuts, colors, what kind of things are those? What are they made of? David Lewis wrote with Stephanie, his wife Stephanie, wrote a famous paper called Holes, where they tried to figure out what a hole was. H-O-L-E. What's a hole made of? Is it a physical thing? It's a very funny and also a very deep article. Deep, oh yes. My ontology includes both the things of science and the things of the manifest image. I have no trouble saying that dollars are real, colors are real, consciousness is real. It just isn't what you think it is. So I am not impressed with the various abstemious ontologies that some people in philosophy want to espouse. there's just atoms in the void. That's all there is. Everything else is just illusion. I see why they say it, but I think it misleads rather than explains. I would rather say, no, let's take these things seriously and also abandon the idea that there is some root, basic, foundational sense of ontology. I love to point out to my fellow philosophers, especially those in metaphysics, who like to talk about ontology, that the one field I know where ontology is taken very seriously, practically, is computer science. And when computer scientists talk about the ontology of their systems, they're doing important, serious, practical, hard work. And it makes a big difference what the ontology of their systems is. I don't know why philosophers don't pay more attention to it.
I have to say that I work at IT University in Copenhagen. They are actually, exactly as you said, computer scientists are absolutely intrigued by this, and they actually want to work with philosophers. So it's not just a case of using the same words to refer to something else.
Yeah.
It's ontology as a note.
It is ontology, and they like to work with philosophers, but they better be philosophers who will take the time to figure out what the computer scientists are doing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah. What are the selective pressures that memes vary in their capacity to respond to, for instance? And there are many answers that I think have to be added up and considered each on their merits. As you say, juicy gossip is particularly likely to spread because we have a genetically inculcated, I think genetically transmitted taste for vicarious excitement, for instance. And also probably a somewhat genetically fostered, in the same way that gaze monitoring and shared attention are genetically fostered. I think telling stories and passing stories on are, there's been genetic selection, not mimetic selection, for the taste for that. It's like our taste for sweet things and our taste for alcohol and our taste for... the thing about memes, one of the really interesting themes in the last, 40 years of research on brains is when they discovered that there were receptors in neurons which were specific for morphine. And you think, wait a minute, what was this, how did this evolve? And they thought, well, it must be that there's something endogenous which has the same signature, namely the endorphins. And it turns out that morphine is an exogenous, something from outside substance, which triggers the same, which the keys fit into the same locks in the brain as the endorphins do. Then began a gold rush, people looking for all the other systems in the brain that were responded specifically to nicotine, to alcohol, to drugs of all kinds, and to humor, and to gossip, and other things where we've come to appreciate that a human brain comes with very biased quality spaces. It's got built-in preferences. Everything that comes into the brain gets a valence, positive or negative. And what our ancestors have done, largely unwittingly, is they've prospected. Basically, they have tried smoking, chewing, swallowing, brewing every plant they ever found, and they've pretty well discovered all the drugs of choice. And I think that the same thing goes on in mimetics, or in mimetic evolution, is that individuals, sometimes very deliberately and working hard, and sometimes really unconsciously, come up with something which tickles the funny bone of their neighbors or of themselves. And pretty soon, they've got a reputation as a comedian, which they like, and so the whole thing builds. So I would think that, say, to take an example I've thought a lot about and co-authored a book on humor, the humor world in culture is comparable to the world of confectionery in cuisine. It's a highly elaborated, semi-scientific exploitation of all the different ways you can trigger pleasure in the taste for sugar.
Guys, we have time for one more question.
Thank you. According to the evolutionary biology, and to the point that we reach this moment, what about extinctions of means? Shall we be afraid of mass extinctions of means? Something like this?
Extinctions of means?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it happens all the time.
Shall we be afraid of something like mass extinction episode, which we know from biology? Right?
Yeah. Well, let's...
next point. Okay.
Well, an obvious case, of course, if you want to talk about mass extinctions, is the mass extinctions of languages. And there's, I don't know, maybe 6,000 languages left, but many of them have only a dozen or six or even two or one native speaker left. And when they go, they're gone, they're extinct. And there are wonderful, heroic field linguists out there trying to capture these languages before they go extinct. And there's lots of arguments about whether people should make special efforts to preserve them. But we're certainly heading in the direction of the mass extinction of languages. And with that, of course, will go many non-linguistic means as well. Whole ways of life are going extinct at a great rate. And, as usual, they're being out-replicated by forms that, in one way or another, are better suited for the roles that are available. It's sad, but it's a sad case of meme extinction.
Nice nostalgic note to end the meeting. So thank you again, Mr. Dennett.